"20 years. That's a long time to learn what trust really is. In my field, it isn't a feeling. It's a structure. It's the sterile field, the sealed vial, the unbroken chain of custody. You place your most intimate secrets, your blood, your biology, into our care, and we become guardians, silent, invisible. At the clinic in London, Dave was one of those guardians. He was exceptional, skilled, the kind of nurse who could calm the most anxious patient with a quiet word, find a vein on the first try in the dimmest light. We relied on him, liked him. So the first time he dropped a sample, our concern was immediate. For him, "Dave, are you ill? You look pale." He blamed a dizzy spell. We sent him home, told him to rest. It happened again, weeks later. We insisted on a full medical workup. Nothing. No anemia, no vertigo. We relaxed. Perhaps it was stress, a missed meal. The human body has its mysteries. The mind, however, has its compulsions. I remember the quality of the light that afternoon, harsh, fluorescent, humming in the ceiling of the secure containment lab. I pushed the door open and time didn't just stop, it fractured. He was alone, of course he was. He had a beaker in his hand, a patient's sample. But he wasn't at the prep station, he was turned away, his shoulders hunched in a private, almost intimate posture. Then he turned slightly, and I saw the rim of the glass at his lips. Our eyes met. In that instant, the entire architecture of trust we'd built collapsed. It wasn't just a breach, it was a desecration. The beaker fell, shattered on the linoleum, 1,000 pieces of trust scattering. His voice, a dry whisper, tried to fill the void. I dropped it. What followed was a grotesque parody of our medical procedures. Panic first, then pleading, offers of money, desperate, sweating oaths that it would never happen again. But I had seen the truth in his eyes, not shame, but the terror of being discovered in his most private, profane ritual. My duty was no longer to him. It was to the trust itself. I reported him. The machinery of professional consequence is cold, efficient, and absolute. He was dismissed. His registration revoked. A report was filed with the authorities for the malicious mishandling of a biological hazard. He ceased to exist in our world. We felt his absence as a relief, a tumor cleanly excised. For 6 weeks, the scar tissue formed. Routine returned. Then, the green sedan. My driveway at dusk. Him, emerging, his face not angry, but empty. A vessel filled only with a desperate, directionless fury. I shouted. My husband Ben came out of the house like a force of nature. The standoff was quiet, vicious. Ben's promise was not of legal action, but of immediate physical violence. It was the only language left that Dave understood. He retreated. The police were sympathetic, but their tools were blunt. He was already on bail. A harassment warning is a piece of paper. It cannot stop a man who is disintegrating. The stalking began. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of my life. His car, a persistent shadow in my rearview mirror. The clinic parking lot, my route home. The fear? It ceased to be an emotion. It became an organ. A cold, hard knot of certainty setting beneath my ribs. The finale was on a country road, slick with autumn rain, dusk. His headlights erupted in my mirrors, blinding. He didn't want to pass. He wanted to punish, to dominate. He rode my bumper, then swerved beside me, his tires on the verge, trying to shepherd my car into the deep wooded ditch. I remember the sound, the spray of gravel, the roar of his engine, the silent scream in my own throat. I overcorrected. The world spun in a slow, sickening arc. Then impact. Mud. Silence. I was bruised, shaken, but alive. And the traffic camera at the junction had seen it all. His intent etched in light and motion. This was no longer about a stolen sip from a beaker. This was attempted vehicular assault, a direct threat to my life. He was arrested, held. At trial, the judge bundled it all together: the biohazard, the harassment, the assault. The sentence felt like a slap. 6 months, eligible for release in 3? 3 months for trying to end my life. I sat in that courtroom and a cold, clean fury settled in me. Justice, it seemed, was a child's concept. We moved on, guardedly. The years layered themselves over the memory, softening its edges. Last autumn, the Birmingham International Conference Center, a cavernous hall buzzing with thousands of medical professionals, the smell of coffee and carpet cleaner. And there, moving through the crowd near a modest booth, a ghost. It was him, Dave, older, thinner, hair gone steel gray. He wore a name tag, an exhibitor's pass for a company I didn't recognize, VitaCare Supply Solutions. He was smiling, shaking hands, the model of a middling salesman. A primal animal fear shot through me. Then it was washed away by something colder, a clinical, detached curiosity. What ecosystem did this creature now inhabit? I asked a colleague stationed at a neighboring booth. She glanced over, her lips thinning. Oh, them! They're a bit gray market. Supply off-brand reagents, cheaper consumables to budget labs and private clinics. There were whispers, an investigation into their warehouse conditions a few years back, improper storage temperatures, questionable sterile protocols. Nothing stuck, but the smell never quite left them. I watched him from a distance. The smile was practiced, but it didn't reach his eyes. In the moments between interactions, his gaze would go flat, vacant. It wandered over the crowd, over the displays of gleaming, legitimate equipment, and I saw it. The same restless hunger, the same magnetic pull towards the unclean. He hadn't conquered his obsession. He had partnered with it. He was no longer a solitary deviant contaminating single samples. He was a cog in a system that potentially contaminated entire diagnostic streams. His perversion had scaled. He had found his place in the murky intersection where medicine meets the margin, where purity is compromised for profit. I left without a word. I filed no report. What would I say? I have a feeling? But I understood everything then. The court sentence was a punctuation mark, a brief administrative pause. His real sentence was life. A life sentence of his own crafting. He is free to walk the streets, but he is forever barred from the clean, well-lit rooms of real medicine. He is condemned to forever haunt its fringes, to trade in its shadows, to be a man whose handshake carries the faint, persistent odor of compromise. He is trapped in the very contamination he craves. The law required he lose his liberty for 3 months, but his own nature demanded he lose his soul. Forever. That is the more complete justice, terrible and fitting. He is out there, right now, smiling that empty smile, selling his shadows, and he will never, ever be clean again.
I was there, writing jokes for a man whose greatest fear was a joke that landed, a boss who sanitized humor, drained the color from it. We were ghostwriters for a ghost of an idea, a company destined to fail, and it did. But in that gray little office, I worked beside Paul. Paul was from Quincy, dry wit, the kind of funny that doesn't announce itself. It just is. He was brilliant, and he was a vault. Sealed shut, no after-work drinks, no stories of a life outside. He arrived, he wrote clean, solid copy, and he vanished into his apartment. A mystery. But in comedy, you let mysteries lie. You don't poke the quiet ones. Then, the voice. An older woman's voice, in the communal area. Then, from his office, clear as day. I heard it. My first thought was, human, good for him, company, a mother visiting, something normal. I poked my head in, teased him. What's up, Casanova? His face did not change. It was a mask of blank confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. The denial was absolute, a stone wall. I backed off. Maybe it was private. Maybe it was painful. I let it go. A week passed. The voice came again through the thin wall. This time, it was an argument. Her tone was sharp, nagging. His voice was low, defensive, apologetic. A real, heated, human argument. Then, silence. I waited, listened for a door, for footsteps. Nothing. After half an hour, I knocked. Come in. I opened the door, expecting to see two people, Paul and the source of the voice. The room held only Paul, sitting at his desk as if he'd been there for hours, peaceful. Dude, I said, the confusion thick in my throat. I know I just heard a woman in here. Where is she? His face closed, like a shutter slamming down. There's no one here, Kurt. Paul, the walls are thin. I heard her. What followed was a slow-motion collision, my gentle pressing, his solid, immovable denial, and then the fracture. His face flooded with a dark, violent red. He stood up. His body was tense, coiled. Get out of my office, Kurt, now! The look in his eyes, it wasn't anger at me. It was terror of being found out. But found out for what? I left, shaken. That evening, my boss and we tried to logic it out. The woman must have been hiding in the closet, behind the door, some forbidden romance, an affair. We crafted a sane story to explain the insane secrecy. We were building a roof on a house that was already collapsing into the earth. The next morning, Paul wasn't at work. My bridge was closed. A detour. I was late. My boss mentioned an incident. A man, on the bridge, stopped his car, got out, started screaming. The police took him away. We joked grimly. Probably Paul, road rage. It was Paul, but it wasn't road rage. The full story, it dripped out to us over weeks, through a contact, a friend in the system. Paul had not just been screaming. He was begging people to call the police because he said he had killed his mother. He had cooked her head in his oven, and he had eaten it. The police went to his apartment. They found a roasted pig's head on a baking tray. It was clearly, unmistakably, a pig, animal, not human. They told him this. They showed him. They said, Paul, this is a pig. And he erupted. He called them liars. He lunged
He had to be restrained. The animal head on the tray was proof to them. To him, it was proof of something else entirely. A different truth, a terrible personal truth. He was committed, a mandatory psychiatric hold, where, as far as I know, he remains. The system, it doesn't let go. And the voice, Joel, the woman's voice I heard, was it a hallucination so powerful that it vibrated through the walls? Was he rehearsing, arguing with a ghost that only he could see? Was the sound I heard not a real woman, but the sound of a mind slowly, meticulously tearing itself loose from its moorings? I will never have that answer. I sit here now, my name on better things, in the credits, the grind, it paid off. But sometimes in the quiet, I think of Paul in his gray office, writing clean, harmless jokes, while inside his skull a storm was building, a chaos he was trying desperately to argue with, to apologize to quiet. We thought his silence was just personality. It was the silence before the scream on the bridge. Comedy is about the observed truth, the shared recognition. But some truths are not for sharing. They are prisons. And some people are serving a life sentence inside their own minds. And you can work right beside them and never hear the walls closing in. Until you hear a voice through a wall that isn't really there. And you realize the most terrifying punchline of all is the one that never gets delivered. It just hangs there, in the air, forever.
My name is Mark. For 4 years, my world was the hum of fluorescent lights and the glow of security monitors. Westgate Mall. It was a simple life, a predictable rhythm. You clock in, you watch, you clock out. You don't look for trouble. Trouble is a way of finding its own. I met Craig in the break room. The quiet man. Bald spot already forming, glasses. Looked more like an accountant than a security guard. But the boss said he was solid, reliable. The kind of guy who hadn't missed a day in 6 years. You don't question that. You just welcome him to the watch. Our job was mostly eyes. 23 cameras, a wall of silent television screens showing a silent world. Day shifts, you react. Night shifts, you wait. I noticed it first on a slow afternoon. Craig wasn't scanning. He was fixed. One screen, camera 14, tiny treasures, the baby store, a shoplifting hotspot. I thought he'd spotted a thief. I asked him. He jumped, like I'd caught him at something. Switched the feed, mumbled, it was nothing. An hour later, he was back, staring at the pastel aisles, the tiny clothes. That's when I made the obvious, wrong assumption. There was a pretty girl who worked at the register. I teased him. You're into her, aren't you? He didn't get angry. He blushed, a deep, fiery red. I took his silence as confirmation. Laughed it off. You're all right, Craig. I was wrong. The pieces started coming together on the night shift, 2:30 a.m. His turn to walk the patrol, my turn on the monitors. I saw it, a security shutter, not fully closed. Tiny treasures. I radioed him. No answer. Just static. And in that silence, a cold understanding began to form. Craig wasn't answering. The baby store was open. Rules said we never enter a closed store. Craig was a rule book. For him to break it, something was very wrong. I found him inside, in the dark.
He stepped out from behind a display of stuffed animals, pale as a ghost, said he heard a noise. It was a lie, a bad one. The next night he thanked me, said he was going to be a father, said he was scared. It was another lie, a quieter one, but the fear in his eyes was real. I just didn't know what it was for. Normalcy returned, for a while. Then my phone buzzed, a video from a friend. Check out this loser freak. The video was dark, shaky. A man in a diaper, a bonnet, a giant blue pacifier, babbling in a baby's voice. Then he spoke, in his own voice. It was Craig. The revelation wasn't a shock. It was a sick, slow sink, a puzzle solving itself in the worst way. This was the obsession. This was the secret. The baby store wasn't about a crush. It was about whatever this was. The video was spreading, going viral, in our small city. It was a timer, counting down to the end of his life here. That night in the security office, the air was thick enough to choke on. He had no idea I knew. For 3 hours, I wrestled with it, with him sitting 3 feet away. Finally, I spoke. My voice was dry. Hey, Craig? I saw a video today. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His face turned that dark red again. His hands shook. Sweat beaded on his skin. A silent confession. I had to ask the only question that mattered, the one screaming in my head. Craig, are you a weirdo for kids? His head snapped to me, real horror in his eyes. No, he shouted, his voice cracking. It's not like that. I swear to God. I believed him. In that moment, I believed he wasn't a predator. But that left only a deeper, more confusing dread. If not that, then what? And it didn't matter. The world wouldn't care about the distinction. I looked at him, a man about to be erased. Craig, you have to get out of town. You need to leave now. He understood. He put his head in his hands, and he sobbed. Not like a man, but like something broken. He cried for everything he was about to lose, for the life he had set on fire with his own foolishness. That was the last time I saw him. He was gone before the laughter and the anger hit them all. The boss said he'd have fired him. Everyone called him a freak, a pervert. I understand why. But that's not what I feel when I think of him. I feel fear. I'm a father. I think about the man who swore he wasn't a threat. I think I believed him then. But people change. They spiral. A compulsion that starts in a darkened room, dressed in a diaper. Where does it end? Does it get better? Or does it curdle, twist into something darker? I hope he's okay. I hope he found help. I hope he found peace far from here. I have to hope that, because the alternative is that he didn't, that his secret world grew shadows. And if that happened, if some other vulnerable life ever intersects with his path, then a part of me will always wonder. It will wonder if the man watching the monitors should have done more than just watch.
Story 4: The Girl Who Called Me from the Future, 2025. My name is Aaron Vance. I was 32 years old in May of 2025, and my life was a quiet, contained orbit, a modest graphic design job, a 2-bedroom rental in a leafy, unremarkable suburb, a cat named Mercury, and a careful, curated piece. I was good at building walls, emotional, professional, spatial. I liked my privacy. I cherished the silent hours after midnight, when the world felt still and entirely my own. That peace was a lie. A temporary ceasefire. In May of 2025, the walls I'd built began to crack from the outside in, not from the past, but from a future hurtling backwards to meet me. I started receiving phone calls from a girl I had never met. A girl with a voice like a frightened sparrow, who claimed she was calling me from a place that hadn't happened yet. She said she was calling from 2028. I wish it was a prank. I wish it was just a scam, some cruel data mining trick. I wish I could dismiss it as sleep paralysis or a psychotic break. But what happened next? The proofs, the warnings, the visceral, violating intrusions proved one terrifying, immutable thing. The future isn't just a destination. It's a predator. And it's coming for us, along a fixed, unchangeable line. There's nothing we can do to stop it. We can only run, and know that it's already waiting where we're going. It began with a violation of a simple, personal rule: never answer after midnight. The screen glowed in the pitch black of my bedroom, a harsh, electric blue. Unknown number. The ringtone, the default marimba chime, seemed obscenely loud, a surgical instrument probing the silence. On the fourth ring, a stupid, half-asleep curiosity overrode my sense. I swiped to answer, bringing the device to my ear. Hello. A sound met me. Not a voice at first, but the acoustic texture of a space, a hollow, rushing white noise, like wind through a long tunnel, or bad reception from the bottom of a well. Then, beneath it, a shaky, shallow breathing. Is this Aaron? The voice was small, high, unmistakably a child's. A girl. It held a tremor that wasn't just fear, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Please don't hang up. I sat up, the sheets pooling around my waist. Who is this? My voice was gravelly with sleep and irritation. Do you know what time it is? She hesitated. I heard a faint, muffled sound, like a hand covering the receiver, then a whispered argument with someone I couldn't hear. When she spoke again, the words came in a desperate, tumbling rush. I'm calling you from 3 years ahead. The sentence didn't compute. It was nonsense. A prank from a bored teen with a voice changer. A wave of cold annoyance washed over me. Very funny. Good night. Wait. The plea was sharp, a blade of pure panic. Please, you have to listen. They're coming into your house tonight. You need to leave. Now. I hung up. My thumb jabbed the screen with finality. Idiot, I thought. Some kid watching too many creepy YouTube videos. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, its glow extinguished. I lay back, punching my pillow, trying to reclaim the shredded edges of sleep. That's when I heard it. Not from the phone. From the front of the house. A quiet, precise click. A metallic, probing sound. The sound of a lock tumbler being gently, expertly tested. It wasn't the fumbling of a drunk neighbor. It was intentional. Surgical. My blood, which had been warm with annoyance, turned to ice slurry in my veins. The girl's words echoed in the new, listening silence. They're coming into your house tonight. Adrenaline burned the sleep from my system. I slid out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood. In the kitchen, my hand closed around the handle of the largest chef's knife. It felt absurdly light, a toy against the palpable wrongness now seeping through the walls. With my other hand, I dialed 911, my thumb hovering over the call button. My phone buzzed before I could press it. Unknown number. A part of me screamed to ignore it. The larger, terrified part pressed answer and brought it to my ear, saying nothing. The girl's whisper was a ghost in the dark. "Don't call the police." "Why not?" I hissed, my own voice barely audible. "They won't make it in time." The certainty in her small voice was absolute. It wasn't a guess. It was a remembered fact. "How could you possibly know that?" I whispered back, my eyes fixed on the faint strip of light under the front door. Her answer was immediate, simple, and utterly chilling. "Because they didn't, last time." Last time. The phrase hung in the air. It implied repetition. A loop. A previous iteration of this night that had already ended badly. The call dropped. Not with a beep, but with a sudden, complete silence, as if the line had been surgically severed. At that moment, the doorknob turned. Not a jiggle. A slow, full rotation. The deadbolt I'd thrown was still engaged, but the door itself groaned in its frame as steady, immense pressure was applied from outside. Wood creaked. The brass knob began to bend inward with a soft, metallic whine. Flight instinct overrode every other thought. I turned and ran through the dark house, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the cool, damp night. I scrambled over the wooden fence into my neighbor's yard, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I crouched behind their large garden shed, peering through a crack between the slats. I saw two figures emerge from the shadow of my back porch and slip inside my still open door. They moved with a silent, fluid coordination that was alien. No flashlights pierced the gloom. They didn't speak. They simply navigated. They walked from the kitchen to the living room, to the hallway, with the unerring confidence of someone who had walked that path 100 times before. As if they already knew the layout. As if they were following a script written in a future I couldn't see. They were inside for exactly 10 minutes. 10 minutes where I stopped breathing, where time stretched into a cold, rubbery eternity. Then they emerged, empty-handed, and melted into the darkness between the houses, gone as silently as they'd arrived. At 3:04 a.m., shivering behind the shed, my phone lit up again. The same unknown number. This time, I answered without hesitation. "Did you leave?" Her voice was a little steadier, but threaded with an immense sadness. "Yes," I breathed. "Who are you? How do you know any of this? What is happening?" A long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her gathering courage across the impossible distance. When she spoke, her voice was the saddest sound I had ever heard, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of a broken world. "You won't believe me," she whispered, "but I'm your daughter." The night seemed to tilt. The ground beneath me felt insubstantial. "I don't have a daughter." "You will," she said, and the simple future tense was a doorway to a life I'd never imagined. "In 2027. A laugh, brittle and hysterical, caught in my throat. "Prove it. Right now. Prove you're from the future, or I hang up and call the real police." She didn't hesitate. She sniffled, a wet, childlike sound, then spoke with a devastating clarity. "Your mom's birthday is next week. May 22nd. She isn't going to pick up your calls because she's in St. Michael's Hospital. She fell in her garden. She sprained her wrist and they're keeping her overnight for observation because of her blood pressure. But she made your dad promise not to tell you because she didn't want you to worry." The world dissolved into static. My knees buckled and I slid down the rough wood of the shed. My mother was in St. Michael's. She had fallen. My father had called me just that evening, his voice carefully casual, saying she was taking it easy. The specifics: the sprained wrist, the blood pressure observation, the request for secrecy were details known only to the three of them. And now, to me. And to this voice on the phone. How? I couldn't form the question. It's in the letter you find in her desk after, the girl said softly. The one she writes you but never sends. Trembling, cold to my core, I demanded she explain everything. Who were the figures? What did they want? Her voice broke, crumbling under the weight of memory. Things go bad in your house. Something happens, in June of 2028. I don't want that to happen again. She was crying now, quiet, hopeless sobs. Again? What happens? Tell me. They took you, she wept, the words ripped from her. From my bedroom. I was 6. I hid in the closet. I heard you scream. And I never saw you again. The air left my lungs. The knife I still clutched felt like a useless stick. Who took me? Who are they? The line began to distort. That hollow, tunnel-like static rushed back in, swallowing her voice. She was shouting, fighting against the growing interference. Not human, they're not, the signal, it draws them. Her voice stretched, digitized, and shattered into a burst of white noise. Then silence. For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of hypervigilance. I installed new locks, a security system, cameras. I slept with the lights on. The girl's calls stopped. The silence was almost worse. I began to cling to the idea of an elaborate, impossible hoax, a hacker, a stalker with uncanny knowledge. The human mind will embrace any logic, however tortured, to avoid the abyss of the illogical. Then, at 1:51 a.m. on a Tuesday, the phone rang. This time, there was no whispered plea. It was raw, unfiltered terror. She was screaming. Aaron, please listen, they found me, they know I'm calling, the line isn't safe. Her voice splintered. The call didn't drop. It glitched. It layered over itself, a horrific chorus of overlapping timelines. Dozens of her, hundreds, all speaking at once, a cacophony of warning from fractured futures. You have to leave the city. They're not from here, they're from the between time. The house is an anchor point. They're coming through the phone. The last word elongated into a piercing, digital shriek that stabbed into my ear. The call died. At the same exact moment, every light in my house, the overheads, the lamps, the digital clocks, the standby LEDs on the TV and microwave snuffed out. Not a flicker. A simultaneous, total extinction. I looked at my phone. The battery icon, which had read 87% a second before, now flashed a critical, pulsing red, 1%. And in the new, absolute blackness of the hallway, a blackness so complete it felt like a solid entity I heard breathing. It was not human. It was slow, wet, and rhythmic, with a faint, clicking gurgle underlying each inhalation. It was the sound of a large, complex lung system operating in a dense atmosphere. And it was coming from the direction of my bedroom. Getting closer. I didn't wait. I fled, again, out into the night, leaving the dark, breathing house behind. Standing on the empty, rain-slicked street, my whole body shaking, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail. From the same unknown number. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. hissing, warping static, like a tape chewed by time. Then her voice broke through, distant, desperate, as if shouting from the far end of a collapsing corridor. Don't go back inside. Not tonight. Not next week. Not ever. They marked your house in their timeline. It's a doorway for them now. A fixed point. You can't change a fixed point, you can only avoid it. Her voice was fading, being pulled away. I strained to hear. What do I do? I whispered to the night, to the phone, to the ghost of my future child. The voicemail ended. The last 6 words were clear, calm, and final, etched into the recording with the grim certainty of a tombstone epitaph. Where you live, is where you die. I moved at dawn. I took nothing from the house. I drove until the fuel light came on, rented a furnished apartment in a different city under a cousin's name, bought a new phone with cash. I became a ghost in my own life. For months, the silence held. I started to breathe again. I started to believe, in the cowardly, hopeful way humans do, that I had outrun it. 2 nights ago, the new phone, the secret, cash-paid phone with a number known to 3 people rang. Unknown number. The sound was a heart attack. I stared at it, a rabbit frozen in predator sight. Something deeper than fear, a pull from the very marrow of my being, made me answer. I didn't speak. The voice that came through wasn't a child's. It was a woman's. Tired. Refined with age, but cracked with a grief so profound it was a physical presence on the line. It was hauntingly, terrifyingly familiar. It was the timbre of my own voice, echoed back at me across decades. Mom, the woman whispered, the words soaked in tears and a love that had known only absence. It's me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't make a sound. The future was on the phone. Not the near future of a little girl, but a farther, lonelier future where that girl had grown up without me. A long, static-filled pause. I could hear her struggling, could hear a new sound behind her, a low, resonant humming, like massive machinery powering up. They found me again, she said, her voice breaking with a final, weary resignation. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. The line, it's two-way. And they're coming through your window right now. The call ended. Behind me, in my new, anonymous, supposedly safe apartment, the latch on the window I had checked and locked 3 times before bed creaked. Not from the wind. From the inside. I didn't turn around. I didn't look. I ran. I never found the girl. I will never meet the woman she became. They are ghosts of a timeline that is haunting me, echoes of a love that was severed before it could begin. I live in motels now. I change cities weekly. I carry a bag with a change of clothes, cash, and a cheap burner phone. But the calls, they find me. Not often. But sometimes, deep in the dead of night, the phone will ring. Once. A single, piercing trill that slices through the silence. When I answer, there's never a voice. Only that hollow, tunnel static and the faintest, fading echo of a child's sob. A warning sent from a losing battle, a signal growing weaker with each attempt. And every so often, when exhaustion wins and I catch my reflection in a dark diner window or a motel television screen, I see more than just my own pale, haunted face. In the deep background of the reflection, just over my shoulder, I swear I see a small, blurry face. A little girl with wide, knowing eyes. Watching. Waiting. Not from the future anymore. Maybe from right behind em. Story 5: The Thing That Came Back for Me. My name is Adrian Mills. And this happened in the spring of 2025. Back then, I was a ghost in white sneakers, a man who existed between the hours of midnight and 8 a.m. I worked as a night janitor for St. Vincent's Memorial, a mid-sized, weary-looking hospital nestled in the foothills outside Boulder, Colorado. People always imagine hospitals as bright, sterile, fluorescent-lit temples of urgency, filled with the reassuring cacophony of beeping monitors and hurried footsteps. But that's only true during the day. After midnight, when the shift changes are done and the last of the daytime visitors have trickled out, a hospital undergoes a profound metamorphosis. It becomes a labyrinth. A cavern of shadows punctuated by islands of humming, cold light. The smells change. The sharp antiseptic gives way to the older, deeper sense of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and the faint, sweet metallic ghost of human fear. The rooms, even the empty ones, hold on to the memory of the people who were in them. You can feel it in the air. A lingering charge. And I knew every inch of that place. I knew which floorboard on the second floor neurology hall creaked like a gunshot. I knew the exact, inconsistent flicker pattern of the light outside the maternity ward storage closet. I knew the quiet, solitary rhythms of the place like I knew my own heartbeat. But there was one thing I had never told anyone, not in any interview, not to any friend who asked about my work. St. Vincent's used to have an old, standalone psychiatric wing. The West Wing. It had been closed, sealed shut, for almost 20 years. The official reason in the employee handbook was consolidation of services due to ongoing funding reallocation. Corporate speak for a ghost story no one in administration wanted to tell. But everyone who'd been at St. Vincent's longer than a few years knew the rumors. They were passed down like dark folklore in break rooms, patients found in rooms they hadn't been assigned to, staring at walls, whispering about the thin nurse. Nurses quitting mid-shift, leaving their badges on the station desk without a word. Security guards, big men with thick necks and calm demeanors, flatly refusing to do solo rounds near the West Wing after sunset, no matter who ordered it. That part of the building wasn't just closed. It was sealed. Heavy, industrial sliding gates had been installed across the connecting corridors on each floor. The doors themselves were chained and fitted with magnetic locks that hadn't received a voltage pulse in decades. The lights were permanently off. The HVAC had been rerouted. It was a corpse within the larger body of the hospital, a limb amputated and sutured shut. But the air around it, it always felt wrong. Thicker. Colder, even in summer. Walking past those gates, even on the sunniest afternoon shift for a deep clean, felt like passing a sealed tomb. A pressure would build in your ears. A primal, limbic warning would fire in the back of your skull. It wasn't just empty. It was waiting. Like something was pressed against the other side of those rusted metal doors, listening for your footsteps, matching its breath to you. It started on a Thursday night. April 10, 2025. A night so unremarkable it felt like an insult. My shift began at 12 a.m., same as always. I clocked in under the bleary-eyed gaze of Frank, the security guard on the front desk, traded a silent nod, and collected my custodial cart from its berth. The cart was a symphony of familiar noises, the rattle of spray bottles, the slosh of gray water in the mop bucket, the squeak of a wheel that needed oil. Comforting, in its way. I started on the third floor, the surgical recovery ward. It was quiet. Most patients were sleeping, doped on pain meds. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor from a half-open door and the sub-audible vibration of the building itself. I worked methodically, trash, surfaces, floors. Autopilot. I turned a corner into the long, north-south hallway that acted as the main artery for that floor. At the far southern end, maybe 60 feet away, was the sealed gate leading to the west wing. A chain-link gate, painted the same dismal green as the walls, topped with a sagging restricted access, authorized personnel only sign that was more rust than vinyl. I was 10 feet into the hallway when the temperature dropped. It wasn't a draft. It was a localized plunge, so sudden and severe the air itself seemed to crystallize. My breath fogged in front of my face, a thick, white plume in the sterile light. The hair on my arm stood up. And I heard it. A soft, metallic tap, tap, tap. The sound was crisp, clear. Like a fingernail, or something harder and sharper, striking polished steel. At first, my mind, desperate for normalcy, supplied pipes. The old steam radiators knocking. But the rhythm was wrong. It was too isolated, too present. Then it changed. Tap, ta-tap, ta-tap-tap. A pattern. Deliberate. Hesitant, then more urgent. It wasn't random expansion or contraction. It was communication. It was trying to get my attention. I froze, my hand tightening on the handle of my mop. My eyes were locked on the distant gate. The sound was coming from there. From behind it. Logic, that frail dam against the flood of the inexplicable, tried to hold. Old building. Metal contracts. Wind in a duct you didn't know was there. Then something slid under the gate. Not a physical object. A shadow. It spilled out from the darkness behind the gate, a pool of absolute black that defied the overhead fluorescence. It was long. Thin. Distorted. Human-shaped in its basic template: a head, shoulders, a torso that tapered into a vague lower body, but the proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too elongated, the head too small, the connection between parts seemed to stretch and warp as it moved. It was a shadow of a person lying flat on the floor and reaching out, but the reach was impossible, stretching nearly 10 feet into the lit hallway. I took a slow, shuddering step back. The shadow didn't recede. It followed. It slid across the speckled linoleum, maintaining its distance, its leading edge a grotesquely stretched hand shape oriented directly toward my feet. It didn't just follow my movement, it seemed to taste the space I vacated, flowing into it with a vile, liquid grace. Almost like it was smelling me. Learning my shape from the emptiness I left behind. I broke. I turned and walked, quickly but carefully, not running. Never run in a hospital, it draws attention back the way I came, around the corner, out of its line of sight. I didn't look back. I could feel the cold clinging to my back like a sodden coat. I spent the rest of the night on the first and second floors, my heart a trapped bird in my chest. I tried every rationalization. Sleep deprivation. The stress of the job. A trick of the light from a malfunctioning bulb. But deep down, in a place beyond thought, I knew. I hadn't imagined it. The cold had been real. The sound had been real. The shadow had been intentional. And the next night confirmed it. Night 2. Friday. A different kind of quiet, the quiet of a building winding down for the weekend. I was on the second floor, the administrative wing, emptying trash bins from the silent, dark offices. The only light came from my cart and the exit signs. I was wrestling a knotted plastic liner from a stubborn can when the radio clipped to my belt crackled to life. Not with a voice, but with a dense, swallowing static that seemed to eat the silence. Then, from within that electronic murk, a whisper coalesced. Adrian. It was a voice stripped of character. Genderless. Ageless. It held no tone of a nurse calling for help, no bored security guard making a check-in. It didn't even sound like a voice produced by vocal cords and breath. It was a dry rustle given syllable, a thought forced directly into sound. I froze, the trash bag forgotten. You left me. My mouth became a desert. I fumbled for the radio's talk button, my thumb slick with sweat. Before I could press it, the overhead lights flickered. Not a building-wide brownout. A localized event. Starting at the far end of the long, straight hallway behind me, the fluorescent tubes winked out. One by one. In a perfect, sequential line. Click. 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 Darkness marched toward me with a terrible, leisurely pace. It was a visual countdown to my location. I didn't think. I ran. I abandoned the cart, my keys jangling, my sneakers squealing on the polished floor as I skidded around corners toward the central elevator bay. I slammed the call button over and over until the doors slid open, then punched the L for lobby as if my life depended on it. Maybe it did. In the bright, normal light of the lobby, my breath came in ragged gasps. Frank and another guard, a younger guy named Leo, were at the security desk, watching the bank of black and white monitor feeds. "Did you hear that?" I blurted, pointing to my radio. "On the channel." A voice. Frank looked up, his expression bland. "Hear what?" "Your radio's been quiet all night, Mills." He tapped the console speaker for emphasis. It emitted only a soft hiss. It said my name, I insisted, my voice too high. Leo, without looking away from the monitors, frowned. His finger stabbed at one of the screens. "Hey, Frank." Why was he down at the West Wing gate again? Ice water flooded my veins. I wasn't anywhere near it. I was on to administration. Frank leaned in, squinting. He rewound the footage. The timestamp in the corner ticked backwards. There, on the monitor labeled 3 West Hall, was a figure in gray custodial clothes. It was me. Or something wearing my uniform, my face. It was standing perfectly still, 6 feet from the sealed gate, staring straight at the rusted metal. The posture was rigid, unnaturally erect. On the grainy feed, I could see my own face, pale and expressionless. My eyes were open, but they weren't blinking. Not once in the 6 minutes and 14 seconds the footage recorded. I hadn't blinked for over 6 minutes. My stomach twisted, a nausea born of profound disorientation. I knew where I had been at that exact time. I'd been fighting with that trash bag, hearing the whisper, watching the lights go out. I had the timeline in my head, corroborated by panic. Whatever the camera had recorded standing at that gate, it wasn't me. It was a placeholder. A lure. Or a promise. Night 3. Saturday. The night the last vestige of my rational world shattered. I was trying to be normal. Trying to reclaim my territory. I was mopping a first-floor corridor near the outpatient phlebotomy lab. The familiar smell of disinfectant was a weak shield. I was bent over the wringer bucket when a cold, damp breeze, smelling of ozone and something earthy and rotten, brushed the nape of my neck. Then a voice, clearer than ever, whispered directly into my ear from a space of empty air. "I'm out." I whirled around, mop handle raised like a club. The hallway behind me was empty, stretching into a pool of shadow. But on the floor, the murky water I had just spread was disturbed. Ripples moved through it, propagating out from a central point as if from an impact. But there was no impact. The ripples just began. And they moved. A set of them, in a straight line, walking through the puddle toward me. Each ripple step was perfectly spaced. Something invisible was walking through the water on the floor. The ripples stopped just inches from the toes of my boots. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My eyes were fixed on that point, where the invisible thing now stood facing me. To my left was a large interior window looking into a dark conference room. With a soft, crackling sound, like ice forming, a handprint pressed against the glass from the other side. Except it wasn't a hand. It had 7 fingers. Long, spindly, jointed in too many places. The palm was a distorted, arched oval, webbed with faint lines. It was arachnid. Alien. The touch was so cold the glass frosted instantly in a perfect outline of the blasphemous appendage. Below the print, letters began to form in the condensation, scribing themselves as if by an unseen, freezing fingertip. "You left me in the dark." I ran. Not with purpose, but with the mindless flight of a spooked animal. I found Frank and Leo in the security office, my words tumbling over each other. They humored me, their skepticism now tinged with concern for my mental state, and followed me back. The hallway was warm. The floor was dry bone dry, as if the puddle had never existed. The window was clear, smudgeless. "Mills," Frank began, his voice heavy with pity. But Leo wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at the floor. He knelt, shining his flashlight at an angle across the tiles. "What the hell is that?" There, visible only in the raking light, were scratches. Dozens of them. Long, parallel gouges in the linoleum, as if something heavy and clawed had been dragged. They started at the base of the distant, sealed fire door that was the first floor access to the West Wing. Scratches that spoke of immense, desperate force from the inside, and they led, in a winding but unmistakable path, directly to the spot where I had been standing. They ended right at my footprints. That was the night I quit. I left my badge, my keys, my card in the middle of the lobby. I offered no notice, no explanation. I just walked out into the cool spring night and didn't look back. But leaving the hospital didn't fix anything. I'd made a fundamental error in understanding. I thought the thing was attached to the place. To the West Wing. I was wrong. Whatever was in that wing, whatever had learned my name from the air, or from the silent, staring doppelganger on the camera, it was attached to me. And it followed me home. 1 week later, I was in my own bed, in my small, safe apartment 20 miles from St. Vincent's. I'd taken sleeping pills, seeking the blank void of unconsciousness. I woke at 3:12 a.m. Not groggily, but with a synaptic snap, fully alert. The pills had failed. Because the sound hadn't let them work. Tap, tap, ta-tap. The same rhythm. But now it wasn't on metal. It was on the drywall of my bedroom, right behind the headboard. My heart seized. I lunged for the lamp on my nightstand, fumbling for the switch. Warm, yellow light flooded the room. And my blood turned to ice. On the wall, cast by no visible source of light in the room, a shadow was stretched. It was the same elongated, distorted silhouette from the hospital hallway. It was positioned as if someone was standing right beside my bed, leaning over me. But there was nothing there to cast it. The shadow didn't move with the light. It was independent, a stain on reality. Then the whisper came, not from the room, but from inside my own head, a cold thought that wasn't mine. You left, but I didn't. My desk lamp flickered. As it did, the shadow on the wall twitched. It didn't shift with the changing light. It moved of its own volition. It jerked closer, its elongated hand shape stretching, the fingers elongating further, crawling along the wall toward the side of my bed where I lay paralyzed. I didn't scream. I made no sound. A primal survival switch, deeper than fear, flipped. I threw myself from the bed, grabbed my car keys from the dresser, and ran. Barefoot, in my t-shirt and boxers, I fled my apartment, down the stairs, into my car. I didn't look back. I haven't been back since. But here's the part that haunts me, the part that reshapes the entire nightmare. Yesterday, from a motel room 3 states away, I checked an old email address I hadn't used in years. Spam, newsletters, and one message with the subject line, St. Vincent's, urgent follow-up. It was from my old manager, a bureaucrat who'd never shown an ounce of urgency in his life. The body of the email was terse, clearly written for liability purposes. Mr. Mills, following your departure, a routine security sweep discovered a breach in the sealed West Wing, psychiatric, access point on the first floor. Entry appears to have been made from the interior, though no personnel were present. During the subsequent inspection, old patient logs were reviewed for archival. An anomaly was found. Attached for your awareness. The attachment was a scanned PDF. A photocopy of a yellowed, typewritten ledger page. Patient admissions and transfers for April 2005. My eyes skipped over the names, the diagnoses, the doctor's notes, until they landed on the final entry at the bottom of the page. It was a transfer order. Patient, Mills, Adrian. Age, 7, transfer to a long-term juvenile care facility in Denver. In the status column, stamped in faded red ink, was one word, failed. Scrawled beside it in frantic, looping handwriting, the same red pen had circled my name and written, missing. Search terminated April 15, 05. The date on the file was April 13, 2005. 20 years ago. I was 7 years old. I have no memory of any hospital stay as a child. My parents, both gone now, never spoke of it. My childhood photos show a gap that year, which my aunt always said was because I had a long bout of mono. The floor of the motel room seemed to tilt. The walls felt too close. The whispers, the shadow, the cold, they weren't chasing a night janitor who'd stumbled too close. They were calling for a patient. A little boy who never made it out. Whatever is following me, whispering my name, leaving its impossible prints on my walls at night, it didn't find me in that hospital. It remembered me. It knew me long before I ever pushed a mop bucket down a lonely hall. And I don't think it wants me dead. The scratches on the floor led to me. The shadow reaches for me. The message on the glass, it wasn't a threat. It was an accusation from a thing left in the dark. I think, after 20 years of waiting in the silence of a sealed wing, it just wants me back. To finish the transfer. To take me to the place I was supposed to go. And the thing wearing my face on the camera, that wasn't a lure. It was a rehearsal. It's learning how to be me, so when it finally takes me, no one will even notice I'm gone. Story 6: The Wrong Passenger. My name is Daniel, and I've been a ride-share driver since 2021. In that time, my car has been a confessional, a party bus, a therapist's couch on wheels, and occasionally, a vomitorium. I've picked up thousands of passengers. The spectrum of human oddity is vast and predictable: the tearful drunk reciting an ex's phone number from memory, the tourists who treat the back seat like a safari vehicle, the intense weirdos who want to discuss conspiracy theories in a whisper, the sweet old ladies who offer hard candies from depths of purses that smell of lavender and thyme, the awkward teens holding their breath until I drop them at the movie theater. But the one I picked up on December 3, 2025, just shy of 2 a.m. in a snowstorm. He wasn't any of those things. He didn't occupy a point on the spectrum of human oddity. He was a discontinuity. A tear in the fabric of the mundane. In fact, he wasn't anything I would ever call human. It started at 1:47 a.m. The dashboard clock glowed a soft, relentless green. The snow wasn't falling, it was being hurled at the windshield in thick, frantic sheets, the wipers fighting a losing battle. I was on the far edge of the county, where the streetlights gave way to the deep, starless dark of farmland and pine forest. I was cold, my lower back ached from 12 hours of sitting, and the coffee in my thermos had long since turned to acidic sludge. One more ride, I'd promised myself. The surge pricing was good. One more and I'd call it a night. The app chimed. A single, clear note that sounded too loud in the insulated quiet of my car. The map showed the pickup as a pulsating dot on a stretch of old pine road. I zoomed in. The dot wasn't on the road. It was set back, nestled in the digital representation of a large, wooded plot. The name next to it, Old Pine Hill Cemetery. My thumb hovered over the screen. Who the hell orders an Uber from a cemetery at 2 a.m. in a blizzard? A prank? A drunk groundskeeper? Someone locked out of their car at a grief support group? The fare estimate flashed it was triple the usual rate for the distance. The drop-off was 12 miles away, to an address that was just a pin in a rural area, no street view available. The cancellation fee for no-show was substantial. Greed and fatigue outvoted instinct. I tapped accept. Bad decision. The worst decision. The kind of decision you replay in your mind for the rest of your life, which, as I would soon learn, might be a shorter span than you'd hoped. The passenger. The cemetery was an old one, the kind with towering, weeping angels and obelisks stained black by decades of rain and lichen. A high, wrought iron fence, punctuated by stone pillars, ran along the road. The main gates were chained shut. My headlights cut two wavering tunnels through the swirling snow, illuminating only the skeletal remains of winter trees and the faint, gray shapes of headstones beyond the fence. There was no one there. I put the car in park, the engine idling. I was about to tap no-show when a figure detached itself from the deeper darkness between two massive, leafless oaks just inside the fence line. He was tall. Well over 6 feet, and unnaturally thin, like a sapling stretched toward a distant light. He wasn't wearing a coat. No hat. No scarf. Not even gloves. Just a perfectly tailored, jet black suit, the kind you see at high-end funerals. The snow landed on the wool of his shoulders and didn't melt. It just gathered there in a fine, white dusting. And he wasn't shivering. He stood with a preternatural stillness, his hands at his sides, facing the car. A cold knot, separate from the winter chill, formed in my stomach. Just get it over with, I thought. He's a weirdo. Get him in, get him out, get paid. I unlocked the doors. He moved then. Not with a walk, but a glide. He seemed to cover the 20 feet from the trees to the passenger side rear door without his feet visibly moving through the deep snow. One moment he was there, the next he was at the car. The moment the rear door opened, the climate inside my vehicle was violated. A wave of cold so intense and dry it sucked the moisture from the air rushed in. My breath, which had been fogging the windows slightly, now erupted into a thick, white cloud. The windows themselves completely fogged over in an instant, sealing us in a private, opaque bubble. The scent that came with him was the smell of turned earth in deep winter, of stone, and beneath it, a faint, ozone sharpness, like the air after a lightning strike. He slipped into the back seat and shut the door with a soft, definitive click. The dome light went out. Silence, except for the muffled howl of the wind and the metronome of the wipers. Then he spoke. His voice was a smooth, cultured baritone, devoid of any regional accent. It was a voice made for reading audiobooks or delivering bad news with impeccable calm. "Good morning, Daniel." My heart didn't just jump, it performed a violent, sickening lurch against my ribs. I hadn't spoken. My profile name on the app is Dan. My license isn't visible. My name wasn't displayed anywhere. I found my voice, forcing it through a constricted throat. How do you know my name?" In the rearview mirror, I saw his reflection. The interior was dark, but the glow from the dashboard instruments painted his features in sickly greens and oranges. He smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. There was no warmth, no crinkling of the eyes. It was a mechanical upward pull of the lips, too wide, too deliberate, revealing teeth that were perfectly straight and very, very white. "I've been waiting for you," he said, as if that were answer enough. I put the car in drive. The tires crunched on the packed snow. The world outside was a blur of white and black. The GPS instructed me to continue down Old Pine Road for 4.7 miles. I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The fog on the windows refused to clear, even with the defroster on full blast. We were in a moving cave. The man didn't blink. I watched him in the mirror. His eyes remained open, fixed on the back of my head. He didn't look out at the storm, didn't check his phone, didn't fidget. He was a statue in a black suit. After 5 minutes of unbearable silence, he leaned forward. Not his whole body, just his head and shoulders, bringing his face closer to the gap between the front seats. I could feel the cold radiating from him, a pocket of deep freeze in the warm car. His voice was calm, almost soothing, a horrible parody of concern. "Do you want to know the exact time you'll die, Daniel?" The car swerved slightly as my hands jerked. I corrected, my pulse hammering in my temples. "What?" "Your death," he repeated, each word precise and chill. "It's soon. I can see it from here. It's quite vivid." I swallowed hard, my mouth dust dry. "Look, man. I don't want any trouble. If you want to get out, I can pull over right here. No charge." "No," he whispered, and the whisper seemed to coil around the word no, giving it weight and finality. "You're going the right way." His breath washed over the back of my neck. It was cold. Not winter air cold, but the absolute, soul-sucking cold of the void between stars. It raised goose flesh across my skin and sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Halfway through the drive, the GPS died. Not the signal, the entire app. The map on my phone screen dissolved into static, then turned a blinding, featureless white. I glanced down, confusion overriding my fear for a second. Then, lines began to draw themselves across the white expanse. Black, jagged lines. They weren't rendering roads or landmarks. They formed letters, then words, scribing themselves with frantic, digital haste. He sees you. A pause. The lines scrabbled again. He knows you. Another pause. The final message etched itself, the letters larger, more desperate. Keep driving. From the back seat, the passenger exhaled slowly a long, satisfied sound, like a man settling into a favorite chair after a long journey. We're almost there, he murmured. But here's the thing, we weren't almost anywhere. The GPS had frozen before announcing the turn. We were now on a narrow, unplowed Forest Service road, a tunnel of black pine trunks and heavy, snow-laden boughs pressing in from both sides. There were no houses, no yard lights, no reflective signs. No cell towers. Just endless, swallowing woods and the relentless snow. I felt a movement in the back seat. A subtle shift of weight, a change in the quality of the silence. I checked the rear view mirror. My passenger wasn't sitting anymore. He was crouched on the floor of the back seat, his knees up near his chest, his body coiled. His head was tilted at a sharp, avian angle, his too wide smile gone, replaced by an expression of blank, predatory intensity. He was watching me like a cat watches a bird at a feeder. Not with malice, but with a pure, focused interest. Then he spoke again, his voice now a dry rustle from that crouched position. Do you remember the man you hit? My foot, of its own volition, lifted slightly from the gas pedal. The car slowed. What? The smile returned, wider now, stretching the pale skin of his cheeks taut. In the dark, it was a gash of white. The man on the highway. State Route 9. Late November, 2019. A Tuesday night. Foggy. You were coming back from your sister's in Riverdale. You were tired. You were arguing with your girlfriend on the phone via Bluetooth. You didn't see him in the dark until he was right there. In your lane. Not walking on the shoulder. Standing in the center. You swerved, but not enough. There was a thump. A heavy, wet sound. You drove home, and you spent the next hour sitting in your driveway, engine off, pretending nothing happened. You told yourself it was a deer. A big one. You checked the bumper in the morning. There was a dent. A smear of something dark. You pressure washed it away. My stomach twisted, a nauseous corkscrew turning in my gut. He was right. Every detail was right. The date, the location, the phone call, the fog, the sickening impact. The sleepless night. The pressure washer. The lie I'd told myself so fiercely I'd almost come to believe it. I know what you saw that night, he whispered, his voice dropping even lower, becoming intimate, conspiratorial. In that split second before impact, in your high beams. You saw it was a man. You saw his face. His eyes wide. And I know what followed you home. The last vestige of my composure shattered. I slammed on the brakes. The car slid sideways, tires losing purchase, spinning uselessly for a heart-stopping moment before we shuddered to a stop, sideways across the narrow road. The engine stalled. In the sudden silence, the only sound was the thwip 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 of the wipers and my own ragged, panicked breathing. I turned in my seat, facing the crouched figure in the back. Get out, I said, my voice trembling with a fear so profound it tasted like metal. "Now. Ride's over. I don't want your money. Just get out." He didn't move. He didn't uncrouch. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up one long-fingered hand. His index finger, pale and seemingly jointed in one too many places, tapped the headrest of the passenger seat. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was hollow, final. "You can't run from something that was already with you," he said. His black eyes held mine in the mirror. "The moment you saw him, and chose to drive away, you formed a bond. A tether. You left a part of yourself there on that road. And he left a part of himself, with you." Then, as if controlled by his will, the dome light flicked on. For the first time, I saw his face in clear, unforgiving light. His eyes, they weren't eyes. Not human ones. They were like polished obsidian stones, perfectly round and depthless. They didn't reflect the light, they swallowed it, and in their fathomless blackness, something moved. Something sinuous and dark, coiling just beneath the surface, like eels in a midnight pool. His skin was impossibly pale, almost translucent, stretched over high cheekbones with no visible pores or blemishes. And his mouth, when he opened it to speak again, stretched far too wide, the corners seeming to nearly reach his earlobes, the jaw moving with an unnerving, unhinged flexibility. "I'm not here to hurt you, Daniel," he said softly, the words slithering out from that impossible maw. "I'm merely a conductor. A facilitator. I'm only here because you finally looked back. You've been thinking about him lately, haven't you? The anniversary. The guilt is a radio signal. I'm just the cab that answers the call. I began, but the words died in my throat. The car's headlights and interior lights flickered once, twice, and died completely. Not a sputter. A total, instantaneous extinction. The dashboard went black. The wipers stopped mid-swipe. We were plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt solid. The storm outside was suddenly, eerily silent. No wind howl. No snow pattering on the roof. From the utter blackness of the back seat, the passenger's voice came, a whisper that seemed to originate from all around me. "He's here." My eyes, straining against the dark, were drawn to the driver's side window. Outside, in the woods, a shape moved. A man stepped out from between the dense pines, his movement stiff, jerky. He was barefoot, wearing only ripped, dirty flannel and dark jeans caked with frozen mud and old blood. His neck was bent at a grotesque, impossible angle, his head lolling onto his left shoulder. One side of his face was a mask of dried, black blood, matting his hair. His eyes were milky, unfocused, but they were aimed at the car. My vision blurred, swimming with tears of sheer, undiluted terror. Because even through the gore and the distortion of injury and time, I recognized him. The high cheekbones, the shape of the jaw. The man from the highway. The one whose eyes had met mine for a fractured second before the impact. The one I'd convinced myself was a deer, a phantom, anything but a human being I'd left broken on the asphalt. His head gave a sickening, wet crack as he corrected its angle, looking directly at me through the glass. A low, guttural sound escaped his lips, not a word, but a groan of air through a damaged windpipe. Then he started walking toward the car. Slow. Deliberate. One leg dragged behind him, foot twisted inward, scraping a trench in the snow. The other lifted and fell with a heavy, dead weight. Crunch. Scrape. Crunch. I couldn't breathe. My lungs were slabs of ice. I was trapped in a frozen coffin with a thing that wasn't human, watching the ghost of my greatest sin shamble toward me out of a silent blizzard. The passenger's voice slithered into my ear, intimate and chillingly reasonable. "So now, Daniel, you have a choice." A long, pale finger emerged from the darkness of the back seat, pointing past my head at the figure now just a few feet from my window, its breath fogging the glass. "Would you like him to get in the seat?" The finger swung, pointing at the empty passenger seat beside me, "or yours?" That's the last thing I remember. A soundless explosion of white behind my eyes. A sensation of falling through the frozen earth. I woke up at dawn. Gray, cold light filtered through the windshield. I was sitting upright in the driver's seat, my hands resting neatly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The engine was off. The car was parked, perfectly straight, in an empty, snow-covered gas station lot 20 miles from the forest road. The storm had stopped. The world was hushed and still. No passenger. No footprints in the pristine snow around the car. No drag marks. No sign of anything. I was alone. My phone, which had been dead, was now resting in the center console, plugged into the charger. It was at 100%. On the lock screen was a single notification. Not from the rideshare app. From an unknown number, with no contact name. The message read, "Next time, look where you're going." Below the text was a photo. It was a low-angle shot, taken from among trees, the lens speckled with snow. It showed my car, parked at the iron gates of Old Pine Hill Cemetery. The timestamp in the corner read, December 4th, 25, 1:47 and 3 seconds a.m. The exact moment I'd arrived to pick him up. In the photo, you could see me in the driver's seat, a blurry shape. And in the back seat window, clear despite the snow and the darkness, was a face. Pale. Smiling that wide, deliberate smile. His polished stone eyes were looking directly at the camera. At the person taking the picture. The person standing in the woods. I never drove for the app again. I sold the car. I moved apartments. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, when I'm lying in bed and the world is too still, I hear it. A faint, rhythmic sound, like a finger tapping on glass. Tap, tap, tap. And I remember his choice. It wasn't a choice between seats. It was a choice between being the driver and being the passenger. Between running from what's behind you, and being carried by it. So, if you're ever driving alone at night, the road's empty, your phone lighting up with a request, and the pickup pin is on a stretch of road with no lights, or at the edge of a forgotten field, or outside a place where the ground is full of quiet tenants. Let it ring. Let the timer run out. Don't accept. Because not every passenger is trying to get home. Some are already there. And they're just looking for a ride, to bring something back. Story 7. The apartment above me. My name is Elise, and in early 2025, I moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in the quiet, rain-washed neighborhood of Ballard in Seattle. It was nothing fancy, a boxy, brick-faced building from the 1950s with drafty windows and radiators that hissed like angry cats. But it had charm. Hardwood floors that sloped endearingly toward the center of each room, crown molding thick enough to survive a bomb blast, and a deep, clawfoot tub. The rent was cheap, a minor miracle in the city. The neighbors I'd met during my viewing were friendly in a low-key, Pacific Northwest way, a retired teacher named Walter who bakes sourdough, a young couple with a quiet baby. Most importantly, it was the top floor. Unit 4C. The penthouse of my modest world. No one overhead to stomp, vacuum at odd hours, or drag furniture at midnight. Just me, my books, and the quiet patter of rain on the roof. Peace. That's what I was buying. Or so I thought. The first night I slept there, a Saturday in late January, I realized something was profoundly wrong. Because even though I lived on the top floor, with nothing above me but an empty attic space and the roof, I could hear footsteps above me. Not the settling of old timber. Not the scurry of a possum in the eaves. These were heavy, deliberate, bipedal footsteps. The kind made by weight shifting from one foot to the other. They paced directly over my bedroom ceiling, from the wall above my headboard to the wall above my closet. Back and forth. Back and forth. A slow, methodical patrol. The ceiling joists groaned and creaked under the burden with such alarming volume I lay there, stiff as a board, convinced the plaster was moments from cracking and raining down on me. I complained to the landlord, Mr. Armitage, the next morning. He was a genial man in his 60s with a perpetually stained cardigan and a ring of keys that could anchor a ship. He listened from behind his cluttered desk in the basement office, a faint smile on his face that vanished when I described the pacing. "There is no apartment above you, Elise," he said, his tone one of gentle correction. "I know that. But there's an attic, right? Someone must be up there." He shook his head slowly, his expression shifting from genial to concerned for my sanity. "That attic is sealed. Has been for over a decade. The access hatch is in the fourth-floor hallway, and it's got a padlock through the hasp. I have the only key. It's just insulation, old wiring, and a whole lot of dust." I felt a flush of frustration. Then what did I hear? He offered a practiced, paternal shrug. "Old buildings make noises. Pipes expanding. Timbers contracting in the cold. Wind in the ventilation shafts. You're on the top floor, you get the full symphony. You'll get used to it." But I knew the difference between a house settling and a footfall. Old buildings groan. They pop. They don't take 4 steps east, pause, turn, and take 4 steps west. They don't have a rhythm you could set a metronome to. Night 2. The footsteps returned. The same pacing. The same relentless, heavy rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Stop. A moment of utter stillness that felt more like listening than resting. Then, a new sound, a slow, grating draag, like a foot being pulled reluctantly across the floorboards, resisting the motion. It was a horrifyingly human sound. An exhausted sound. I turned off the TV, the sudden silence amplifying the noises from above. I held my breath. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. A presence. Anger, hot and sudden, cut through my fear. This was my home. My sanctuary. I marched to the kitchen, grabbed the broom, returned to the center of the bedroom, and stabbed the handle upward, banging the flat of the brush against the ceiling with 3 loud, defiant thwacks. The footsteps stopped. Silence flooded back in, thick and immediate. I stood there, heart hammering, broom held aloft like a warrior with a spear. 2 full minutes of nothing. Not a creak. Not a pop. The building itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then, directly above the spot where I stood, something tapped 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Clear. Precise. Mimicking my 3 bangs exactly. It wasn't a loose nail rattling. It was an answer. A cold, intelligent acknowledgement. I slept that night with every light in the apartment blazing, the broom leaning against my bedside table. Night 3. 2:41 a.m. I came armed. My phone, set to voice memo, lay on the pillow next to me, its tiny red recording light a brave, digital eye pointed at the ceiling. The footsteps began their nightly patrol. I lay still, tracking them on the recorder's waveform display, watching the spikes jump with each impact. They paced for 7 minutes. Then, they stopped directly above my head. I waited for the answering taps. I waited for the drag. Instead, I heard something new. A voice. It was muffled, filtered through layers of wood and insulation, but horribly distinct. A man's voice, dry and whisper-thin, strained from lack of use. It didn't echo in an empty attic. It sounded close, intimate, as if his mouth was pressed to a crack in the floorboards. "Elise," it whispered. A pause, filled with the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. "Can you hear me?" "My name." It said my name. The recording captured it, a ghostly, undeniable whisper over the rustle of my sheets as I jerked upright. The phone clattered to the floor. I didn't stop to retrieve it. I was out of the bed, out of the apartment, flying down the 4 flights of stairs in my socks, bursting out the front door into the cold, misty night. I sat in my car, engine running, heater on full blast, until the sky lightened to a bruised gray. The landlord checks the attic. At 9 a.m., face pale and eyes ringed with sleepless shadows, I confronted Mr. Armitage in his office. I played the recording for him. The color drained from his kindly face as the whispers, the footsteps, the 3 precise taps, emanated from my phone speaker. The genial paternalism was gone, replaced by a dawning, professional dread. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay. Let's have a look." He fetched a heavy-duty flashlight and the legendary ring of keys. We took the elevator to the 4th floor, the silence between us heavy. The access hatch was in the ceiling of the dimly lit hallway, a painted-over square with a simple hasp and a heavy padlock. It looked untouched for years, shrouded in cobwebs. Mr. Armitage had to strain to turn the key in the rusted lock. It finally gave with a metallic shriek. He hooked his fingers into the recessed handle and pulled. The hatch resisted, then yielded with a groan of protesting wood, dislodging a small snowfall of dust, dead insects, and flakes of ancient paint. A wave of air rolled out. It wasn't just cold, it was dank, stale, carrying the smell of mildew, old paper, and something else, a faint, sweet sour odor, like forgotten laundry. He shone the flashlight beam into the square of darkness. A pull-down ladder was fixed to the inside of the hatch. It was down, resting on the attic floor. "That," Mr. Armitage whispered, "should be folded up." He climbed up first, his movements stiff with fear. I followed, my heart in my throat. The attic was a cathedral of shadows, the roof beams arching overhead like black ribs. Insulation lay in ragged pink bats between the joists. Dust lay thick and undisturbed over everything, except for a narrow path. Starting at the base of the ladder, a trail of bare footprints meandered through the dust. They were large, splayed, the toes clearly defined. They didn't wander aimlessly. They formed a circuit, a well-trodden oval that traced the perimeter of the space directly above my bedroom. The path was so frequently used that the dust was completely worn away in places, exposing the gritty subfloor beneath. And in the very center of this oval, above where my bed would be, the dust was scuffed into a confused mess, as if someone had stood there for a very long time, shifting their weight from foot to foot. The beam of the flashlight followed the prints. They didn't lead to a hidden cot, a stash of food, a camp. They led only to that endless, obsessive circuit and that central, waiting spot. Mr. Armitage's face was ashen. "Nobody's been up here," he repeated, but it was a mantra now, a spell against the evidence before our eyes. The lock, the dust everywhere else. But someone had. Someone with bare feet. Someone who paced. Someone who stood and listened. Someone who knew my name. I moved out that same day. I left behind furniture, dishes, the security deposit. It was a cheap price to pay. 1 week later, I was safe. I was staying in my sister's cozy, modern rambler in the suburbs of Bellevue. A single-story house. No attic. No upstairs neighbors. Just a solid, reassuring roof over my head. The fear began to recede, becoming a bad story, a traumatic anecdote. Then, at exactly 2:41 a.m., my phone rang on the nightstand. Unknown number. A cold hand closed around my heart. I answered, my voice a croak. "Hello." No voice. Only breathing. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. The inhalations were deep and wet, the exhalations long and sighing. It was the sound of someone very large, very close to the receiver. Then, cutting through the breath. Tap, tap, tap. The 3 taps. My ceiling code. I hurled the phone away as if it were a live spider. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking uncontrollably. The phone began to ring again. The screen glowed in the dark room. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. And again. On the 4th ring, a terrible compulsion seized me. I had to know. I snatched it up and pressed it to my ear. The whisper was there, clear as if he were in the bed beside me. It wasn't muffled by floorboards anymore. It was crisp, intimate, tinged with a terrible sadness. "You left." A long, shivering exhale. "But I'm still above you." I froze, my blood crystallizing in my veins. Because in the silence that followed his words, I heard it. Not through the phone. Through the ceiling of my sister's single-story house. Directly above the guest bedroom, in the empty, insulated space between the drywall and the roof shingles, a floorboard let out a soft, high-pitched creak. Then a footstep. A single, heavy, unmistakable thump. Something was pacing. Right over my head. In a house that had no attic, no crawl space anyone could fit in, no logical place for a man to be. And that's when I finally understood, with a clarity that shattered my last illusion of safety. It was never the building. It wasn't the apartment. It wasn't the attic at all. The thing wasn't in a place. It was attached to a concept, the space above me. It followed the sound of my sleeping breath, the rhythm of my resting heart. It was a parasite of geometry, a stowaway in the negative space of my life. Wherever I went, whatever roof I sought shelter under, it would be there. In the rafters, in the ductwork, in the impossible void between floors, it would walk its endless, patient circuit. Listening. Waiting. Pacing back and forth on the other side of a few inches of wood and plaster. Until the moment I close my eyes. And then, it stops pacing. It stands directly above me. and it listens closer. Story 8: The Visitor in the Driveway. My name is Jonah Wells, and in October of 2025, I did the thing everyone in their late 20s is supposed to do. I bought a house. Or, more accurately, I agreed to a 30-year mortgage on a small, boxy, mid-century rancher 2 miles outside the town limits. It wasn't anything special: a faded yellow rectangle with mossy shingles, a few stubborn azalea bushes, and a vast, empty backyard that sloped into a wall of dark pine forest. But it had a long, straight gravel driveway. That driveway was, in a strange way, why I bought it. It felt like a declaration. My land. My approach. A physical, crunching under tires boundary between the world and my peace. Everything was perfect. For 3 days. Until the night the visitor came. And once it found my driveway, it seemed to understand the address. And it kept coming back. The first night, 1:12 a.m. The move was chaos. Boxes were mountains in every room. I was up late, fueled by cheap pizza and the manic energy of new ownership, unpacking a crate of books. The house was a cacophony of small sounds: the groan of old plumbing, the tick of the radiators, the sigh of wind in the pines. I was in the living room when the world outside my window turned to stark, white day. Click. The motion-activated floodlight, mounted under the eaves, had triggered. Its LED brilliance was surgical, bleaching the color from everything. It illuminated the entire stretch of gravel, the overgrown lawn, the dark tree line beyond. My first thought was deer. They were common. I walked to the large picture window, expecting to see a flick of a white tail disappearing into the woods. My chest tightened, a cold band of iron squeezing my ribs. There was a man standing in the exact center of my driveway. He was about 40 feet from the house. He was utterly, unnaturally still. Not the fidgeting stillness of someone waiting for a ride. Not the swaying, breathing stillness of a living thing. He was a statue. A mannequin planted in the gravel. He was facing my front door, his body a straight, perpendicular line to the house. His clothes were what I noticed next. They were all wrong. A suit, but not from this century. The cut was boxy, the shoulders padded, the trousers baggy and high-waisted. The fabric was a faded, matte gray, like newsprint left in the sun. On his head sat a wide-brimmed hat, a fedora, pulled low. It cast a deep, black shadow over his entire face. I squinted, leaning closer to the cold glass, trying to pierce that shadow. The light was brutal, unforgiving. It should have illuminated something: the curve of a cheekbone, the glint of an eye, the line of a mouth. But beneath the hat brim, there was only a seamless, velvet darkness. A perfect absence of features. It wasn't that his face was in shadow, it was that the shadow was his face. A jolt of pure, animal adrenaline shot through me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my sternum. Call someone. Call the police. My phone was on the kitchen counter. I turned away from the terrifying stillness outside to grab it. In that split second of looking away, the light outside turned off. Click. The sudden return of darkness was more shocking than the light had been. I lunged back to the window, peering into the now profound black. The driveway was empty. Just gravel and night. No figure. No movement. No sound of retreating footsteps on stone. He was just gone. As if the light had been the only thing holding him in reality. Night 2. The knock. I spent the next day in a haze of rationalization. A prank, I decided. Some local kids testing the new guy. A trick of exhaustion and shadows. The clothes. A thrift store find. The face. A ski mask. The stillness. A dare. I almost convinced myself. That night, a strange anxiety kept me up. I found myself watching the clock. As the digital numbers on my microwave flipped to 1:12 a.m., I held my breath. Click. The floodlight blazed on. I was already standing in the dark living room, well back from the window. My body went rigid. Slowly, silently, I crept forward and peered around the edge of the curtain. He was back. Same faded suit. Same unnatural posture. Same hat, same void beneath it. But he was closer. 10 feet closer. Now he stood at the very edge of the light's reach, his toes just touching the bottom step of my small porch. He hadn't moved up the driveway, he had simply appeared at this new, more intimate distance. This wasn't a prank. Pranks don't have this punctuality. This ritual. Fear curdled into a sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. I backed away, fumbling for my phone on the coffee table. My hands shook as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm, female voice asked. There's a man in my driveway, I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. He's just standing there. He was here last night too. I'm at 1743 Old Mill Road. He's. Knock. The sound was soft, but it pierced the quiet of the house like a gunshot. 3 deliberate, evenly spaced knocks on my front door. Solid wood. The sound you make when you're not sure if anyone is home, but you hope they are. Sir? Hello, the dispatcher's voice was tinny in my ear. I couldn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the front door, 20 feet away. Knock. 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 Then, a whisper seeped through the keyhole, under the door, through the very grain of the wood. It was soft. Calm. An old man's polite, rasping request. Let me in. But the voice was layered. Wrong. It sounded like 2 or 3 people speaking the same words in perfect, dry unison, their vocal cords slightly out of phase, creating a low, buzzing harmonic that vibrated in my molars. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the dispatcher's voice a distant, buzzing insect. When the police arrived 5 minutes later, their tires crunching loudly on the gravel, the porch was empty. The light was off. They swept the area with flashlights. No one. But Officer Harris, a serious man with a lined face, called me over. He pointed his beam at the soft dirt of the flower bed beside the porch steps. There were footprints. Bare footprints. Long, narrow, with a high arch. They pointed toward the house. And they were deep, as if made by someone standing perfectly still for a very, very long time. There were no prints leading away. Night 3. Inside the house. This night, this is the one that rewired my understanding of safety. Of walls. Of inside versus outside. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, fully clothed, a baseball bat beside me. The digital clock was my torturer. 1:05. 1:10. 1:11. Click. The floodlight turned on. Its glow seeped around the edges of my blinds, painting the room in stripes of stark white and deep black. I didn't move. I didn't go to the window. I just stared at the ceiling, my heart a frantic drum solo in the silence. Then, a new sound. Click. This one was inside. The distinctive, plastic snap of a light switch. The hallway light was on. I could see its yellow glow bleeding under my bedroom door. That switch was in the central hallway, by the kitchen entrance. Inside my house. Ice flooded my veins. I sat up, my fingers closing around the cold aluminum of the bat. I moved silently to my bedroom door, pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Gritting my teeth, I turned the knob and swung the door open, bat raised. The hallway was empty, illuminated by the single, cheap fixture. The house was dead silent, holding its breath. I stepped out, my back to the wall, scanning the living room to my left, the kitchen ahead, the bathroom door to my right closed. Then, from the deep shadow at the far end of the hall, where it turned toward the spare bedroom, something shifted. A silhouette detached itself from the darkness. Tall. Broad-shouldered. The unmistakable, wide-brimmed outline of a hat. He was inside. He was in my hall. A soundless scream locked in my throat. My hand shot out, slapping the wall for the hallway light switch, desperate for more light, to banish him. The moment my fingertips brushed the plastic plate, he moved. He didn't walk. He didn't run. The space between us simply collapsed. One frame he was 20 feet away at the end of the hall. The next, he was here. Inches from my face, filling my vision. I didn't see him traverse the distance. He flickered into proximity. His body emitted a dry, cold radiance, like air from a long-sealed tomb. That void under the hat was aimed directly at me. The faceless head tilted slowly, inquisitively, to one side. And then, click. The floodlight outside turned off. Total, impenetrable darkness swallowed us both. I screamed, a raw, tearing sound, and swung the bat in a wild, panicked arc. It met only empty air, the force of the swing spinning me off balance. I stumbled, crashing into the wall. I scrambled on the floor, my hand slapping for the light switch. I found it. Flicked it. Yellow light flooded the hallway. It was empty. He was gone. No sign. No sound. Just me, panting on the floor, the bat lying uselessly beside me. The hidden camera. The next morning, a Tuesday, I drove into town in a haze. I walked into the electronics store and bought the cheapest outdoor security camera they had. A little black dome with a blinking red light. I mounted it under the eave, right next to the motion light, pointed straight down the driveway. I didn't care about theft. I needed proof. I needed to see his approach, his departure. I needed a logic to his haunting. That night, in the spare bedroom at the back of the house, as far from the front as possible, I watched my phone. 1:12 a.m. A notification banner slid down. Person detected, driveway cam. My thumb trembled as I opened the live feed. There he was. In the grainy, color night vision of the camera, his suit was a lighter gray, his hat a dark disc. He stood at the very end of my driveway, where the gravel met the county road, perfectly centered in the frame. Still as death. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that was more terrifying than any sudden movement, he raised his right arm. Not a wave of greeting. A slow, side-to-side motion of the hand, the fingers together. A formal, almost regal gesture. He wasn't waving at the camera. He was waving at my bedroom window. He knew exactly where I'd watched him from that first night. The angle was precise. My heart didn't just stop, it seemed to shrivel in my chest. And in that moment of frozen terror, I saw it. The reflection on the glossy black surface of my phone screen. Behind me, in the dark doorway of the spare room I was hiding in, stood a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette. The top of a wide-brimmed hat just visible in the frame. He wasn't just outside. He was in the house. He was behind me. And he was watching me watch him. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. I threw the phone, bolted out of the room, out of the house, and into my car. I never went back for my things. I moved out the next day. The house was never mine to begin with. It was just a place I'd paid for, a stage for his visitation. I crashed on my friend Mark's couch in his third-floor apartment in a complex downtown. Concrete and steel. No driveway. No yard. Just buzzing streetlights and the constant hum of the city. Safe. 3 nights later, I was half asleep on the couch, lulled by the distant sirens. My phone, charging on the floor, buzzed. Not a call. A notification. My blood turned to slush. It was from the security camera app. Person detected, driveway cam. That's impossible, my mind screamed. The camera is at the house. There's no Wi-Fi there anymore. I unplugged it. But with a dread heavier than any I'd ever known, I opened it. It was a live feed. But not of my gravel driveway. It showed a rain-slicked urban street, a sodium vapor street lamp casting an orange pool of light. It was the view from the front of Mark's apartment building. And standing under that street lamp, on the sidewalk, facing the building, was a tall figure in a faded suit and a wide-brimmed hat. His faceless head was tilted up. He was looking at the third floor. At me. The feed had no business existing. The camera was miles away, offline. But he was broadcasting himself. Showing me he was here. That the address didn't matter. The driveway was never the point. I was the point. If you ever see someone standing perfectly still under a motion light, or a street lamp, or even the moon, don't go to the window. Don't open the door. Don't try to reason with the silence. And whatever you do, never let them step onto your property. Never acknowledge them. Because once they're close enough to knock, they're no longer outside. They're in the concept of your home. And once they come inside, they don't leave. They follow. They just change the address. Story 10: The Night Shift in Room 614. My name is Rebecca Sarin, and in early 2025, I was working the night shift at St. James Medical Center, a sprawling, aging complex in the foothills outside Denver. I've been a nurse for 13 years, the last 7 on nights. The things I've seen would make most people walk out and never look back. I've held the hands of the dying as they took their last, rattling breaths. I've seen bodies do things medicine can't explain. I've witnessed grief so raw it seems to warp the air. I am not easily shaken. The supernatural, to me, was just a story the living tell to explain the terrifying mechanics of death and fear. But nothing in all my years of training, experience, or quiet horror prepared me for what happened in room 614. The room was a legend, a ghost story whispered by nursing students and new hires, dismissed with weary smiles by veterans like me. It was at the terminus of the East Wing's 6th floor, a dead-end corridor that seemed to swallow light and sound. The fluorescent tubes there didn't just flicker, they stuttered, producing a rapid, a rhythmic pulse that cast jumping shadows and gave you a headache after 5 minutes. Maintenance had replaced the ballasts, the wiring, the fixtures themselves. It didn't matter. Room 614 had its own atmosphere, and the lights abated, not us. The silence in that hallway didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. A dense, listening quiet that made the tap of your shoes sound like an intrusion. The room had been effectively out of service for months. When admissions were high, they'd try to use it. The results were always the same. Patients, even the heavily sedated or cognitively impaired, would become agitated, then terrified. They complained of a constant, chilly draft no HVAC technician could source. They spoke of whispers that didn't come from the hall, but from the walls, or the air vent, or from just beside their pillow. They described nightmares so visceral they bled into wakefulness, the sensation of a weight settling on the foot of the bed, of cold fingers brushing their ankles, of a shadow standing in the corner that remained even when the lights were turned on. The most common refrain, delivered with a glassy-eyed certainty that chilled me more than any frantic scream, was, "Someone crawled out from under the bed." We'd move them. They'd calm down. The room would be cleaned, blessed by a well-meaning chaplain, and locked. Until the next bed crunch. It was a cycle. I dismissed it all. Hospitals are petri dishes for psychosis, sleep deprivation, powerful drugs, pain, fear. Room 614 was just a room with bad wiring and a powerful psychological reputation. Until one night in January 2025, when the reputation became a resident. The new patient. His name was Evan Blake. Mid-40s, a schoolteacher from Boulder. Admitted after a T-bone collision at an intersection. He was lucky, no internal bleeding, no spinal trauma. A mild concussion, 3 cracked ribs, a symphony of bruises. Stable. Conscious. Alert and oriented. He just needed overnight observation for the head injury. It was a busy night. Flu season had hit early and hard. Every room was full. Every bed was a body. Except one. "We're putting you in 614, Mr. Blake," I said, clicking through his chart on the computer at the nurse's station. "It's quiet. You'll get some rest." When I looked up, the color had drained from his face. He looked at me not with annoyance, but with a dawning, profound dread, as if I'd just handed him a terminal diagnosis. "Please," he whispered, his voice thin and strained. "Any room but that one." I gave him my most professional, reassuring smile. "The one that says I've heard this before, and it's okay. I promise, it's just a room. The East Wing is the quietest. If you need anything, anything at all, you just hit the call button. I'll be right here." He didn't respond. He just stared past me, down the long, flickering corridor toward the dead end, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. His hands, resting on the arms of the wheelchair, trembled slightly. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. The first call, 2:17 a.m. The first few hours were quiet. I did my rounds, administered meds, charted the usual nocturnal rhythm. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the call light for room 614 blinked on the board. A sigh. Probably needed pain meds, or couldn't sleep. I gathered my kit and started down the East Wing. I felt the temperature drop 10 feet from the door. It wasn't a gradual coolness. It was a wall of cold, dry air that hit me like stepping into a walk-in freezer. My breath plumed in front of me in a thick, white cloud. The hair on my arms stood up. Faulty thermostat, my rational mind supplied, but the primal part of me knew, this was the cold of a place that never saw the sun, of deep earth and forgotten spaces. I pushed into the room. The overhead light sputtered violently, casting the space in a jarring, strobe-like effect. The smell hit me next, not antiseptic or illness, but the rich, loamy scent of wet soil and decay, like a freshly turned grave. Evan was sitting bolt upright in bed, the sheets tangled around his waist. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his pupils dilated wide despite the light. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring, fixated, at the far corner of the room, the one opposite the window, where the ceiling light had always been dimmest, a permanent pool of shadow. "There's someone standing in that corner," he whispered, the words barely audible. He didn't point, he just jerked his chin, as if afraid any sudden movement would be noticed. I lifted my heavy-duty pen light, clicking it on. The bright LED beam cut through the strobe effect and punched into the corner. Nothing. Just an empty chair, a blank wall. "You've had a trauma, Mr. Blake," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "Your mind is processing. It's stress. Try to rest. I can get you something to help you sleep." His eyes flicked to mine, wide with a plea I couldn't fulfill. "She's still there," he mouthed. I finished my checks, adjusted his fore, and turned to leave. As I pulled the door closed behind me, I heard it, a soft, dry shuffle scrape across the linoleum floor, like something in slippers or bare feet taking a single step. Right behind where I'd been standing. I whirled, yanking the door back open, my light sweeping the room. Empty. Evan was lying down now, his back to me, perfectly still. But the smell of wet earth was stronger. The second call, 3:41 a.m. His call light blinked again, this time with an urgent, rapid pulse. Before I could even get up from the station, his voice crackled over the intercom speaker, not from the handset but from the room mic, distorted with pure panic. "Don't open the door. She's right behind it." My blood turned to ice. I ran down the hall, the cold hitting me earlier this time, sharper. I skidded to a stop outside 614. Silence. I pressed my ear to the cold metal of the door. Nothing. Not a breath. Not a whimper. "Evan." I called softly. "It's Rebecca. I'm coming in." I pushed the door open slowly. He wasn't in bed. He was curled in the corner by the window, knees drawn to his chest, arms wrapped around his shins, rocking slightly. His gaze was locked on the open bathroom door. The small, dark square yawned like a mouth. "She walked out of there," he whispered, his voice raw. He didn't look at me. "She didn't walk right. She crawled across the floor to my bed." A violent shiver racked his body. "She put her mouth right next to my ear." "What did she say?" I asked, my own voice hushed, drawn into his terror. His lips trembled. A tear cut a clean path through the sweat on his cheek. "She said, 'You're in my room.' Then she licked my ear. Her tongue was cold." My professional composure cracked. I strode to the bathroom, flipping the light on. Empty. Shower curtain drawn back. I checked the narrow closet. Nothing. Against every protocol, I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the bed, shining my light. Dust. A lost syringe cap. Nothing else. But as I went to stand, My hand brushed against the cold chrome of the bed frame. It was freezing. Not cool from the room, but deep, penetrating cold, as if the metal had been sitting in a snowbank for hours. I touched the central support beam. The same. The cold was localized to the bed itself. The third time 5:02 a.m. The hour before dawn is the deepest part of the night shift. The world outside is black, the hospital's rhythm slows, and exhaustion makes everything feel surreal. By 5 a.m., the call board had been dark for a while. I was catching up on charts, but a gnawing unease had settled in my gut. Room 614 was silent. Too silent. When a patient in distress goes quiet, that's when a nurse's instincts scream loudest. I walked down the east wing, the cold now a familiar, hostile presence. The door to 614 was slightly ajar, an inch of darkness showing. No call light. No sound. Evan. I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The light inside the room wasn't just flickering. It was strobing at a frenetic, impossible speed, turning the interior into a series of frozen, jarring snapshots. I pushed the door open. And what I saw, what I am forced to see every time I close my eyes, I still cannot reconcile with the world I know. The thing under the bed. Evan was on the floor, halfway under the hospital bed. Only the lower half of his body from the waist down was visible. His legs were kicking, thrashing violently against the linoleum, his socks scraping soundlessly. The rest of him was swallowed by the darkness beneath the bed. Evan! I screamed, my training overriding my terror. I dropped to my knees and grabbed his ankles. I've got you. Kick towards me. His legs went rigid. Then, from the profound blackness under the bed, something grabbed him. I felt it through his body, a powerful, jerking traction. It wasn't a hand. The force was too widespread, too gripping, like being seized by a powerful vacuum or a giant mouth. Evan's fingernails, scrabbling for purchase on the smooth floor, dug in. They left long, parallel, bloody grooves in the waxed linoleum. A low, guttural sound of sheer effort and terror erupted from under the bed. No. No, please, he screamed, his voice muffled. I pulled with all my strength, bracing my feet against the bed frame. I was a strong woman, but I was nothing against this. It was like trying to pull a man from the jaws of an industrial press. He was sliding away from me, inch by terrible inch. His hips disappeared under the metal rim. Then his torso. His face emerged for one final, horrifying second. His eyes were wide, unseeing, his mouth a rictus of agony. He sucked in a wet, ragged breath and whispered, the words spraying blood from his bitten tongue. She lives here, she lives under the bed. Then, with one final, violent, wet yank, he was gone. Completely. Utterly. The strobing light stopped. The room was illuminated by the steady, ghastly glow of the overhead fluorescents. The silence was absolute. I was on my knees, holding nothing but air, staring at the empty space under the bed. The bloody scratches on the floor ended abruptly at the edge of the frame. There was no hole, no gap, no opening in the wall. The bed was a standard hospital issue, a solid metal pan blocking any view of the floor beneath it. There was nowhere for a full-grown man to go. But he was gone. What we found. The chaos that followed was a blur of uniforms, flashing lights, and futile activity. Security tore the room apart. They moved the bed. The floor was solid, unbroken concrete. They scanned for hidden compartments, Secret passages. Nothing. They went into the room below a storage closet. The ceiling was intact. Evan Blake vanished from a sealed room. His file was marked, classified, and sealed under orders from administrators who looked older and grayer the next day. Room 614 was not just locked, the door itself was removed and the frame was sheetrocked over. The hallway was renumbered. Officially, Room 614 no longer exists. But everyone who works the night shift at St. James knows. We can point to the spot in the east wing where the air grows cold, where the lights still flicker with a nervous, persistent rhythm behind a blank wall. We avoid that end of the hall if we can. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the hospital holds its breath, you can hear it if you stand in the right place. A faint, slow, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape coming from behind the wall. From under where the bed used to be. Like someone or something is still there. Living under the bed. Patient. Hungry. Waiting for the next person who is given the only room available.